stood looking down upon New York in early June. Summer had not yet turned the city into a cauldron of stone and steel. From her height she could glimpse the green of the park, with a glint of silver in its heart that was the lake. Her mind was milling around aimlessly, in a manner far removed from its usual orderly functioning. Now she thought of Theodore, her little brother, his promised return. It had been a slow and painful thing, his climb. Perhaps if she had been more ready to help, if she had not always waited until he asked the aid that she might have volunteered. She thrust that thought out of her mind rudely and slammed the door on it. Fenger. He had said damn when she had told him about Ella, and his voice had been, well, she pushed that thought outside her mind too. Clarence Hale. He makes you think about the things you're afraid to face by yourself, big things, things inside of you. Fanny turned away from the window. She decided she must be tired after all, because here she was with everything to make her happy. Theodore coming home, her foreign trip a success, Ella and Fenger to praise her and make much of her, a drive and tea this afternoon. She wasn't above these creature comforts. And still she felt unexhilarated, dull. She decided to go down for a bit of lunch, and perhaps a stroll of 10 or 15 minutes, just to see what Fifth Avenue was showing. It was 1:30 when she reached that ordinarily well-regulated thoroughfare. She found its sidewalks packed solid, up and down, as far as the eye could see, with a quiet, orderly, expectant mass of people. Squads of mounted police clattered up and down, keeping the middle of the street cleared. Whatever it was that had called forth that incredible mass was scheduled to proceed uptown from far downtown, and that very soon. Heads were turned that way. Fanny wedged into the crowd, stood a tiptoe, but she could see nothing. It brought to her mind the circus day of her Winnebago childhood, with Elm Street packed with townspeople and farmers, all straining their eyes up toward Cherry Street, the first turn in the line of march. Then, far away, the blare of a band. "Here they come!" Just then, far down the canyon of Fifth Avenue, sounded the cry that had always swayed Elm Street, Winnebago. "Here they come!" "What is it?" Fanny asked a woman against whom she found herself close packed. "What are they waiting for?" "It's the suffrage parade," replied the woman. "The big suffrage parade. Don't you know?" "No, I haven't been here." Fanny was a little disappointed. The crowd had surged forward so that it was impossible for her to extricate herself. She found herself near the curb. She could see down the broad street now, and below 23rd Street it was a moving, glittering mass, pennants, banners, streamers flying. The woman next to her volunteered additional information. "The mayor refused permission to let them march, but they fought it, and they say it's the greatest suffrage parade ever held. I'd march myself, only—" "Only what?" "I don't know. I'm scared to, I think. I'm not a New Yorker." "Neither am I," said Fanny. Fanny always became friendly with the woman next to her in a crowd. That was her mother in her. One could hear the music of the band now. Fanny glanced at her watch. It was not quite 2. Oh, well, she would wait and see some of it. Her mind was still too freshly packed with European impressions to receive any real idea of the value of this pageant, she told herself. She knew she did not feel particularly interested, but she waited. Another surging forward. It was no longer, "Here they come," but "Here they are!" And here they were. A squad of mounted police on very prancy horses. The men looked very ruddy, and well set up and imposing. Fanny had always thrilled to anything in uniform, given sufficient numbers of them. Another police squad, a brass band on foot, and then in white on a snow-white charger, holding a white banner aloft, her eyes looking straight ahead of her, her face very serious and youthful, the famous beauty and suffrage leader Mildred Inness. One of the few famous beauties who actually was a beauty. And after that, women, women, women. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, a river of them flowing up Fifth Avenue to the park. More bands, more horses, women, women. They bore banners, this section, that section, artists, school teachers, lawyers, doctors, writers, women in college caps and gowns, women in white from shoes to hats, young women, girls, gray-haired women, a woman in a wheelchair, smiling. A man next to Fanny began to jeer. He was a red-faced young man with a coarse, blotchy skin and thick lips. He smoked a cigar, and called to the women in a falsetto voice. "Hello, Sadie!" he called. "Hello, kid!" And the women marched on, serious-faced, calm-eyed. There came floats, elaborate affairs, with girls in Greek robes. Fanny did not care for these. More solid ranks. And then a strange and pitiful and tragic and eloquent group. Their banner said, "Garment Workers, Infants' Wear Section." And at their head marched a girl, carrying a banner. I don't know how she attained that honor. I think she must have been one of those fiery, eloquent leaders in her factory clique. The banner she carried was a large one, and it flapped prodigiously in the breeze, and its pole was thick and heavy. She was a very small girl, even in that group of pale-faced, undersized, underfed girls. A Russian Jewess, evidently. Her shoes were ludicrous. They curled up at the toes, and the heels were run down. Her dress was a sort of parody on the prevailing fashion. But on her face as she trudged along, hugging the pole of the great pennant that flapped in the breeze, was stamped a look. Well, you see that same look in some pictures of Joan of Arc. It wasn't merely a look. It was a story. It was tragedy. It was the history of a people. You saw in it that which told of centuries of oppression in Russia. You saw eager groups of student intellectuals, gathered in secret places for low-voiced, fiery talk. There was in it the unspeakable misery of Siberia. It spoke eloquently of pogroms, of massacres, of Kiev and its sister horror, Kishinev. You saw mean and narrow streets, and carefully darkened windows, and on the other side of those windows the warm yellow glow of the seven-branch Shabbos light. Above this there shone the courage of a race serene in the knowledge that it cannot die. And illuminating all, so that her pinched face, beneath the flapping pennant, was the rapt, uplifted countenance of the Crusader, there blazed the great glow of hope. This woman movement, spoken of so glibly as suffrage, was, to the mind of this overread, underfed, emotional, dreamy little Russian garment worker, the glorious means to a long-hoped-for end. She had idealized it with the imagery of her kind. She had endowed it with promise that it would never actually hold for her, perhaps. And so she marched on, down the great glittering avenue, proudly clutching her unwieldy banner, a stunted, grotesque, magnificent figure. More than a figure, a symbol. Fanny's eyes followed her until she passed out of sight. She put up her hand to her cheek, and her face was wet. She stood there, and the parade went on, endlessly it seemed, and she saw it through a haze. Bands, more bands, pennants, floats, women, women, women. "I always cry at parades," said Fanny to the woman who stood next to her, the woman who wanted to march but was scared to. "That's all right," said the woman. "That's all right." And she laughed, because she was crying too. And then she did a surprising thing. She elbowed her way to the edge of the crowd, past the red-faced man with the cigar, out to the street, and fell into line, marched on up the street, shoulders squared, head high. Fanny glanced down at her watch. It was 4:15. With a little gasp, she turned to work her way through the close-packed crowd. It was an actual physical struggle, from which she emerged disheveled, breathless, uncomfortably warm, and minus her handkerchief, but she had gained the comparative quiet of the side street, and she made the short distance that lay between the avenue and her hotel a matter of little more than a minute. In the hotel corridor stood Ella and Fenger, the former looking worried, the latter savage. "Where in the world?" began Ella. "Caught in the jam, and I didn't want to get out. It was glorious." She was shaking hands with Fenger, and realizing for the first time that she must be looking decidedly sketchy and that she had lost her handkerchief. She fished for it in her bag hopelessly when Fenger released her hand. He had not spoken. Now he said, "What's the matter with your eyes?" "I've been crying," Fanny confessed cheerfully. "Crying?" "The parade. There was a little girl in it." She stopped. Fenger would not be interested in that little girl. Now Clancy would have. But Ella broke in on that thought. "I guess you don't realize that out in front of this hotel there's a kind of glorified taxi waiting, with the top rolled back, and it's been there half an hour. I never expect to see the time when I could enjoy keeping a taxi waiting. It goes against me. I'm sorry, really. Let's go. I'm ready." "You are not. Your hair's a sight, and those eyes." Fenger put a hand on her arm. Go on up and powder your nose, Miss Brandeis. And don't hurry. I want you to enjoy